Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's HSMAI Europe web broadcast. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tim Wiersma. I will be today's moderator as we explore the topic of leadership in changing times, a conversation on how best to manage in times like these as we address the COVID-19 situation. I am joined here by two very esteemed colleagues, Anant Vithlani. He's the Vice President, Sales for Nordic Choice Hotels. He's responsible for B2B sales for approximately 200 hotels in the Nordic region. He's also the chair of the HSMAI Sales Advisory Board. And also joining today is Mark Haywood. He's Senior Vice President and Head of Europe at RateGain Technologies. In his current role, he manages a commercial team throughout Europe, North Africa, the Caucasus, and Brazil, and leads the overall strategy for growth across all three business lines of distribution, business intelligence, and social media optimization in these regions. I will ask the two of them to say a little bit more about themselves a little bit later in the presentation. I'd also like to acknowledge Enzo Aita, who is with Funnel TV and made this broadcast possible here today. And a little bit more about myself. I'm the principal and owner of Revenue Generation LLC, a hospitality consulting firm specializing in developing revenue strategies for portfolios and individual assets. My previous experience includes work with Host Hotels and Resorts, a real estate investment trust here in North America, Starwood Hotels and Resorts, Red Roof, and two other private equity firms. I'm also the chair of the Revenue Optimization Board here in North America. Now on to today's topic. I'll put together a brief presentation regarding the current situation we find ourselves in. Following that, I will open up the discussion to Anant and Mark, and you will also have the opportunity to ask questions via the chat link during our time together here today. So let's go ahead and get started. Enzo, if you can put the presentation up on the screen, that'd be great. So leadership in changing times, a conversation on how best to handle situations like we're in right now. Next slide, just some of the fine print here, the code of ethics that we always need to cover at the beginning. The discussions, I won't read the whole thing, but just kind of highlight a couple things here. Discussions and issues presented at the meeting today is proprietary and needs approval for release. Next page talks about the code of ethics. More specifically, among the subjects which members should never discuss with competitors are rates, surcharges, conditions, terms, and prices of service, allocation of sharing of customers, and refusing to deal with a particular supplier or class of suppliers. Such discussions often lead to agreements, and agreements among or between competitors regarding any of these subjects are per se violations of antitrust laws and can lead to severe criminal and civil penalties. HSMAI and the Advisory Board Council strictly prohibit any discussions. So there you go. The legal stuff is out of the way. Let's get on to the presentation then. So the next slide. So our objective today is just talk a little bit more about the current situation with the COVID-19, where we are in the world today, the impacts on our industry, and then we'll be talking about leadership during times like this, and then we'll open it up. Majority of our time will be spent asking questions and having a dialogue with you as to how to best address and lead in times like these. So we've all seen them. The headlines are very scary. Right now, there's a lot to keep us up at night. And it's very easy for us to panic in situations like this. If you move to the next slide, this is a picture of what the world looks like as of this morning. As of this morning, there's over 95,000 confirmed cases. It's likely higher than that because a lot of testing has just started. The number of deaths as of today is over 3,200. If there is any silver lining, there's also 53,000 recovered cases already. So the recovery seems to happen about 2 weeks after they're diagnosed. Next slide. So what we need to know about the COVID, should we be scared? Yes, we can be scared, but now is not the time to panic. Instead, we need to be effective in our communication and with the facts of the situation. I think the more that you can bring out the facts of the situation, the lower the anxiety levels will be, and the more effectively we can communicate that, the more effective we can be at reducing the amount of panic out there. Who needs to worry about this? Well, like the flu, elderly people with underlying health conditions, people with compromised immune systems are all at risk. As leaders in the hospitality industry, we need to ensure we be concerned about the well-being of all of our guests at our hotels. And we need to pay close attention to what local public health authorities and government authorities are saying. And we make sure we need to adhere to anything that they're asking us to do. Great example is ITB was canceled last week in Germany upon the direction of the German government. How fast is the disease spreading? And how bad is it? Well, it's pretty bad. It's spreading 2 or 3 times faster than the flu. So we really need to be vigilant and continue to monitor the local situation closely, and again, adhere to any recommendations within your local market there. What is the fatality rate? The fatality rate currently is 3.44% worldwide. That's quite a bit higher than the average flu virus. So we really do need to pay close attention to that. And more importantly, if the outbreak gets bad, such as what happened in Wuhan, it's going to overtax the healthcare system, and the number of fatalities can go up in that case if we can't treat the patients. Obviously, the fatality rate will go up there. Next slide. So just some data, and I pulled some slides from Smith Travel Research, and a lot of it is very preliminary data at this point. You can see for Asia, the first area that was impacted, the occupancy levels in almost all major markets has seen significant declines. Take a look at Macau, for example. They were running 97% occupancy, and now look at their occupancy. They're virtually zero at this point in time. So their hotels are empty, and it's a very significant situation. We're starting to see that in the European market and North American markets as well. So definitely keep monitoring your individual markets and stay on top of that. Next slide. So back when SARS hit back in 2003, you could see the China market in particular saw a significant decline, going down from 80% all the way down to probably on average about 20% occupancy. But then you can see once the travel restrictions started to ease within that market, that was around June, occupancy levels started to rise again. And by July 5th of that year, they almost were fully recovered. So as bad as things look right now, if we do manage to contain this situation, occupancy levels do have a tendency to come back fairly quickly again. Next slide. Also, back in the downturn, 2008, 2009, what we saw, transient demand bounced back pretty quickly during that time period. However, group demand did not bounce back quickly. It took much longer for group demand to recover. Obviously, managing rescheduling groups is difficult, and so we can expect probably the same type of situation to occur where we are right now as well. And then as far as ADR, we'll talk a lot about ADR today, and the recovery aspect of it. You can see during the downturn of 9/11, the ADR took about 12 months to kind of bottom out. And then it took a long time, 24 months, to get back to the pre-9/11 ADR in North America here. And we found that situation in many of the downturns, where if you drop rates significantly, it's just really difficult to get back to previous levels again. There. Okay, so just talking about some of the decision-making framework here. Again, having as much information in your local market that you can obtain, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can obtain in your local markets as far as trending information, pricing information, and so on. It's important that you review that on a regular basis, and it's important to develop a solid framework of making critical decisions based on that data. This helps you manage your emotions as you deal with anxiety and pressure brought on by this business crisis. The use of questions you ask during the information gathering phase is in order to ensure that you consider a wide range of options, and do not avoid making critical decisions, but rather consider consequences of implementing each option, and really take time to discuss that with your leadership teams. As far as accountability is concerned, when circumstances collide, to put up barriers for their achievement, you may have to reassess your goals. Obviously, in many cases, budgets will not be achieved this year, and so you really need to reassess your goals and continue to reassess your goals as more information comes out. Staying ahead of stakeholder expectations is important. I know many times dealing with owners, the last thing they like is surprises. So be as transparent with them as possible and feed as much information to them so that they can stay informed. Leaders share accountability with other members on their team. So it's not on our shoulders completely, but we need to share that accountability, which happens to deepen team bonds while creating stretch challenges for them too. And then the use of outside sources and expertise advice. There's a lot of resources out there. Mark will talk about some of the plethora of information that he has available for us as an industry today. But also sources like Smith Travel Research, your own business intelligence markets, your OTA, BI information, all can be very helpful in understanding those options. And then get some outside expertise in to help you kind of gain perspective, run by scenarios to them as well, so that you can kind of validate what you're thinking there. And then finally, just some practical things that I pulled from a publication by Nancy Hang at Pegasus. She talks about our revenue management systems. Obviously, we're in that special event time period right now, unlike any before, and we really need to make sure that our RMS systems understand what's happening with transient demand, the number of cancellations going on right now. So making sure that you continuously seed that information into the system. Review booking cancellations Is your leisure segment decreasing? Are you seeing a downturn in OTAs? In the event of a crisis, you'll need to determine if cancellation patterns are arising from specific markets and then address them accordingly. Room night pickup. Where are you seeing productivity? Where are you not seeing productivity? There may be certain markets, like drive markets, that maybe were not a big part of your business before, but may suddenly become a greater part of it because people are afraid to travel by airline. And then, of course, monitoring your local airport airline flights and cancellations, and really take that into account for your arrivals that particular day, but also where you're seeing the demand dry up there as well. So that's really the end of the PowerPoint presentation. Now I want to go ahead and start the discussion with Mark and Anant. So Mark, I'm going to ask you first. First off, maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about some of your past experience, who you've been with, and your own personal experience in some of the downturns that you've experienced.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been in the hospitality industry for 23 years now, and I've really been on the side of the hotelier for the bulk of that. I would say about 15 of those years was as a hotelier, managing the commercial operation, revenue, sales, marketing in different companies such as Melia, the Unlisted Collection, the Ascot Group. But then in more recent years with RateGain, with TravelClick before RateGain as well, looking at the technology, the distribution, the business intelligence side of the industry. And, you know, in that 23-year period, which has flown by hilariously, you know, we've had a lot of different market events that have happened to us. There was the volcanic eruption in Iceland, SARS, 9/11, all of these things now with COVID-19 as well that are taking place. All of them have raised very serious concerns to the industry, for me as a hotelier, for me as a distribution partner, for me as an e-commerce expert. So, you know, I've been very heavily involved in my own personal career, and at the same time working with now many different hoteliers and agencies around what they can do to overcome these points.
Great, thank you. Anant, I'm going to ask the same question to you.
Well, I worked in the hotel industry almost around 18 years. I started directly after 9/11, so I experienced the crisis of both 9/11 and the Lehman Brothers crash. During that time of period, I used to work at the same hotel as I'm sitting at right now, Stockholm's largest hotel, Clarence Sun. I opened it, so I really experienced when we went up on a high boom and then just crashed down with almost an echo on the booking department. My responsibility is mainly B2B sales, and we are approximately 500 salespeople in the Nordic region, working with corporate agreements and direct sales like meeting events, groups, events, incentives, and so on. So, yeah, I'm glad to share my thoughts today about how this price could be actually mitigated.
Great, thank you, Anant. Mark, next question. RateGain is connected to over 125,000 hotels worldwide via the connectivity switch Disco, and also the channel manager RateGain. What are your own figures and stats looking like for Europe and globally currently?
Okay, so, you know, I guess as you said at the start of the discussion, there is a downturn in reservations globally, and we're aware of that. However, you know, before I fully answer the question, I just have to say to people, we all have to be aware of some of the information and some of the news that's in circulation. So I was reading a really provocative kind of article recently around a 90% cancellation rate. And then as I delved deeper into the article, it was really referencing the volume of reservations booked into one market, being Italy. And, you know, it was initially positioned as being something that was Europe in general is completely dropping, and not just purely the data on Italy. That being said, Italy for us on the RateGain side, looking at both Disco distribution and the ResGain channel manager, we're still seeing Italy at an 80% drop year on year, which is alarming, but not to be surprised by. We've also seen that the drop rate of reservations hasn't all taken place purely in the last 2 weeks, since everyone's been getting more emotional about the situation. We've actually seen that there's been a steady decline since the start of this year in reservations across generally all channels. As we've seen that coming in, there was in January a decrease of about 15%, February of 10%, but then March, even though we're only 5 days in now, we're already seeing a 27% decline in transactions. So, March has got a very big impact for the industry. But when I have a look a little bit further around the globe, I was doing a bit of a deep dive into Asia, because obviously Asia is a market where everything started from and where everyone's been more concerned about for a longer period of time. And it was interesting to have a note that the global OTAs dropped 21% in Asia Pacific, whereas the regional OTAs only saw a drop of 3%. So there's clearly a strategy thing that's starting to point out that we can learn for in Europe, that whilst global travel going into a market is going to be declined because people don't want to be taking the risk of doing that business trip or that leisure trip, the domestic internal travel is lesser impacted, and normally people are more willing to travel within their own country or their own market than doing the longer haul trips. So I thought that was a very good learning for me personally, and hopefully for the audience around Asia Pacific. But then, being European, as you can tell by my accent, I looked a little bit deeper at the European market. And what I started to find in the European market as well was, whereas the OTAs have been dropping a lot stronger, bookings on someone's direct website on their own booking engines actually have declined at a far lesser pace. So there's been a stronger decline on the OTAs. We can debate the value of OTAs and who books on the OTAs, I'm sure, for hours, but the people who seem to be more brand loyal, that are booking directly at property level, seem to be retaining some of that loyalty. Whereas the OTA clients who maybe shop around a little bit more, there seems to be a starker decline from them. And then, as I looked even further, if we're saying that there's been a decline since the start of January, March, we're only 5 days in. What I noticed actually was in the last 2 weeks alone, they were the biggest drops possible. So this week we've seen a 38% drop of total reservations being processed across our client base. And, there are some key reasons for that. Obviously, the cancellation of ITB, cancellation of IHF, the cancellation of many other events, the increase of cases being reported throughout Europe. But, when I look at it, I think we're still on a data analytical basis. We're still only maybe really a couple of weeks into the severity of this. And we've seen a decline in the lead up whilst things were hotting up in Asia. But as we get into it impacting Europe, it's really the last 2 weeks where data starts to see us at 38% drops in different markets. The other thing I thought was interesting within Europe is that outside of Italy, which everyone is most concerned about, France has actually seen a 52% decline in that same period as well across all channels that we can see, that we're tracking on either Rate Shopping, the Disco connectivity switch, or our channel management. So, not everything is purely as it seems, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That is interesting that you're seeing the OTA drop more so than property direct, and perhaps it has something to do also with negotiated rates and the more loyal customers still coming to our hotels. So that's very good information to know. Anant, how does group and negotiated transient channels, what are you seeing? What have you seen in the last few weeks, and what are you seeing moving forward?
Well, I can just add on what Mark said about general markets. We can see that our major market is dropping in March quite quickly. So if you look at the RevPAR figures, Stockholm just during the last few days have dropped by 25% in RevPAR, and if you look 30 days back, the drop in Stockholm was 1.1%. So it's a quite huge change. And Copenhagen is dropped from -9% for, if you look during the period of 30 days to up to the last few days in March, it's dropped by almost 40%. So there is a big drop in demand. And if you look to the corporate clients we have, most of the bigger corporate clients, they have clear travel restrictions, especially travel restrictions to those areas that are affected. But it's also affect the local. You said that the domestic travel has less impact, but we see that the travel restrictions is that they don't recommend domestic travel. But if it's not business crucial, so it of course affects the domestic travel as well. As I have indication on colleagues in the industry as well, they feel that there is a big drop on the corporate travel. And we have also started to see a lot of cancellations on groups and meetings. I just received an email today where one of our major clients is changing big meeting now in March. They would like to shift it forward, change it to June. The problem is that we are really close to the cancellation policy is already gone. We have to actually take full pay. And it's a bit there are a lot of complicated situations because we try to follow the cancellation rules since it's a country which is not fully affected. So the participants are not coming from either Italy or China or European countries, and there is no governmental instructions that these areas. There is actually no restrictions within traveling within Europe right now, but I feel that clients are actually panicking, some of them, and doing some cancellations. Right? Yes, there's a big impact on corporate travel, both B2B, individual and groups.
Okay, thank you. So just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, please feel free to open up your chat box and put your questions in there. We'll be sure to try to answer as many as possible there. So let's talk about discounting a little bit, and I'll ask the two of you to talk about this. Is there any advantage at all to reducing your pricing right now? Do you think you can steal share? And if so, how best to do that? And if not, tell me a reason why not.
Definitely. So, this is one of the things that we see when we're looking at all of the different business intelligence tools that exist. When you're in a situation, I always kind of go back to the Icelandic volcano for some reason. When you're in a situation where there's limited new demand for occupancy, where there's less people coming in, really having a race to the bottom on price doesn't actually stimulate extra growth of occupancy. It can negatively impact the bottom line heavily. And what we tend to see when we look at all of the companies that I've worked for, and probably all of them that I'll work for in the future, whenever we look at this sort of data, the level of occupancy that's going to come into a market during a situation like we're seeing now, like we saw with the volcano, like we saw with SARS, 9/11, etc., that occupancy tends not to really move an awful lot, and people are still picking hotels based on the service, the location, the necessity, why they want to be there. So discounting your rate, will it give you extra business? Normally not heavily. And what we normally find is when people start to drop their rates in the marketplace, they're just robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the market overall sits kind of with the same level of occupancy. The revenues all drop down between everyone. So there are people out there that will drop rates, definitely, and there's probably a lot of people that are dropping rates already. We can see that there are certain markets where people are dropping rates further than they should be in this situation. But, you know, the overall answer to you there around, will it stimulate extra occupancy? Will it help you? Normally not, because normally there's only a finite number of people that are coming in anyway, and they've normally picked you based on where you're located, who you are, etc. But it's one to keep an eye on, and it's one that, you know, anyone who decides not to use a business intelligence tool to put media on hold really needs to look at that decision, because it may be the wrong one.
Thanks.
And I would like to highlight to you and all the listeners that please don't drop rates, because it won't affect at all. And you showed it quite well, Tim, on your presentation, where after 9/11 the rates dropped for almost 12 months. It took 24 months to actually get the rates back up to the level they used to be 36 months ago. And we have to remember that our industry is a secondary need. So I will only need a hotel in India when I visit my mother-in-law. I won't need it because it's cheaper rates in India. So I won't travel from Sweden to India. So people have a certain need. They go for business travel, they go for leisure travel. They are going to some place, and then they select accommodation according to the place to visit. So, and that's not rate effective.
Yes.
So there's no winners. Even the customer doesn't win if we lower the rates, because if we are not profitable, and there will be a lot of properties affected by lower rates, lower demand, and might not be able to survive these tough times that we might go into. Let's see how long for. But lowering the rates is really risky.
The other thing that we see from our data is a lot of the people who are influenced by the lower rate and the kind of the lower rate shoppers, they're normally booking the lowest rate possible initially on a non-refundable basis or an advanced purchase basis. So normally the stimulus that people are trying to go for around, let's stimulate more occupancy and get the people that are looking for the lower prices, they're normally not able to shift as many as they expect, because the potential shifters that are price sensitive have already locked themselves in on an advanced purchase rate, a non-refundable rate, something that's packaged or opaque already. So even though there's a big tendency to do it's one to be careful of.
And the question is, I was supposed to be in Berlin today, and we canceled the ITB, and I had non-refundable rate.
Yeah.
There. So the question is, for the future now, how many people would like to actually book a refundable rate?
That's actually a very good point. You know, maybe non-refundable rates at your property were starting to grow. I would anticipate that to, you know, if from a marketing standpoint, you might want to highlight the flexibility in your cancel clause for particular rates right now as well.
And something that I did myself earlier this morning was sent an email to our account management and sales team at RateGain and said, moving forward until further notice, do not book any non-refundable rates on hotels or airlines, because we know that we have to have flexibility. Almost everyone in my team said to me, that means the prices will be higher. However, that's the necessity that we live in.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Tim, we have an interesting question here from David in New York, Migano. When can we expect demand to start showing a recovery? Can I give a shot?
yes, please do.
I'm really not sure, but today I heard experts from the governmental institute, some doctors saying that they believe it in October this year, they will have this coronavirus under control. So I personally believe that it might affect a big part of this year, the demand. So because when we saw SARS, it was quite quickly recovered after a few months. But I think this will be longer. But let's see how big the effects will be. That's my personal view.
Yeah, and if you look at the market like China, you know, if we can believe the stats there, they seem to be kind of plateauing a little bit, in some cases in a bit of a recovery mode. So maybe that's a leading indicator. It's just probably too early to tell for sure. But I would agree with you, Anant, that it's probably a greater part of this year at this point that we're going to feel the effects of it.
Yeah.
Mark?
We also have another question from Ankita. Maybe Mark would like to comment the first one first.
I was actually going to say very similar to you, to be honest with you. You know, normally with something like SARS, we saw that being a very short window, the bounce back. However, something like coronavirus, everyone seems to be pinning against more a 9/11 than a SARS. You know, the learnings that we saw with Tim's slides earlier on, the bounce back from 9/11 took a little bit longer, well, a lot longer on things. So, but we just have to see how this one plays out, because as the numbers in China are starting to stabilize now, this will have an impact on other markets.
Okay, so a question from the audience. What can be some ancillary revenue or cost saving ideas for an Indian market? And when can we expect the market to be normal, as we have many events lined up for 20 and 21? Do we have to drop rates? I think we've talked about some of this before.
But let's clarify the rate thing. Don't drop the rates.
Yeah, if at all possible, hold on to your rate. There's actually a webinar next week that I would encourage you to spend some time watching as well. It's HSMAI North America on pricing psychology. It's a speaker from Smith Travel Research, and I've seen the presentation before, and he's done studies in markets of downturn, and he looks at specific competitor sets, and he studied those that you know, a group of them that had dramatic drops in rate. They did see a shift in demand to their properties. However, on the recovery side of it, they took much longer to recover, simply because you know, when comes time to renegotiate rates, or customers get used to that lower rate, and all of a sudden you bring your pricing back up to the pre-event levels, you're going to see significant turnaround. Whereas the properties that maybe they dropped rate a little bit to respond to market situations, but they didn't drop significantly. Their recovery time was much faster, and overall the net revenue over the entire test period, those that had maintained the higher rates were the ones that recovered faster and achieved much higher RevPAR results there. Yeah. Did you guys want to add anything to that?
I have full respect, as well as from Amsterdam is writing that, of course, I have full respect. It's difficult to understand how to keep the rates up, but it's like Sundays. For those of you who would like to fill up Sundays have dropped rates, you'll probably see that you just lose the RevPAR, you just lose the profitability. So and for example, I've talked a lot about with our key account managers, and when the clients have restriction on travel, they follow the travel policy. The companies say if they're not supposed to travel, they won't travel. It doesn't matter if you lower the rates, they won't travel. Yeah. So that's the thing you need to learn. We learn the market if we give lower rates, we learn the market that we can actually stand with this rate. That will make it in the long term not good for anyone.
Yeah. So leading to this question then is, you know, it's easy.
I was just going to comment on Deanne's comment just before we go on to the next question. Sorry. Yeah. I just wanted to mention something that quite a few of our partners that we're working with at the moment are looking at is, if the domestic market, even though there's a decline, is more buoyant than the international market, there's a lot of our clients who are working at the moment on a strategy around how do we attract more of that local domestic market For example, if we're a hotel who normally goes after corporate conferences but says no to weddings, do we consider dipping our toe into that market? So not discounting what you already have, but looking at other things that complement your offering to that market that you normally avoid. There are some hotels that we work with who have a no OTA policy. It's a good time to dip your toe into the water around, if we now connect to A, B, C, D, E OTAs, will that give any difference? So, you know, something that I just, you know, would go back to Deanne's point is really, before you drop the rate, look at all of these other ways of stimulating business from the local market, because it isn't definitely only about the rate.
Yeah, I think maybe that's also a way to answer Ankita's question. What else revenue can you actually look into? Because I really believe that the domestic market could be something, even if it's going to drop a bit, that people will continue to travel because there is always a need to travel, and business will be done. So I'm quite sure that the domestic market will recover more faster. And I don't have any ideas, cost-saving ideas in your market. I get same in operations cost saving that you will have to look into hours you working force and see what you can actually save on. Make sure that you have a flexible operation to meet the demand.
Anant, you shared something just prior to the call. I'd like you to kind of comment on. It has to do with company ratings, and I believe it's on the screen here right now. Did you want to talk about this?
Yes, I think this is one of the advice that I would like to give into you, because if the market, it's not only the hotel industry affected, financial markets are going down figures, and a lot of our bigger properties has bookings done be 1 or 2 years ahead, but our bigger conference have a lead time from 6 months and more than that. So we should actually be aware of customers' ratings and make sure that because you do a credit check when you and you have this agreements that they pay a certain amount before they arrive and so on. We should be aware of that. Maybe the ratings of customers will drop rapidly, and this is a Norwegian company that went bankruptcy last week, and you can see their rating dropped quite quickly the last month. So it was almost impossible for us to actually see that this thing is coming up. So a good advice to all of you is to be aware of the clients you have on the books. How are their payment and ability, and make sure that you follow them up properly. I can also see the retail industry. I think that's one of the industries is really in trouble because people are buying more and more online. So look into which industries are affected more about this coronavirus, and be aware of that. You don't do anything.
Okay, thank you. So kind of a lead into that then, airline routes have started to cancel in many impacted areas. And so let's talk about cancellations a little bit. You know, who do we let off the hook? Who do we enforce cancel policies at this point? And I see Anant just left us for a second. So Mark, I'm going to throw it to you.
Certainly. You know, this subject is a very tricky one because it boils back down to, in a lot of cases, the subject around guest loyalty. And someone this morning had a conversation with me about the very point that we're in exceptional circumstances at the moment. And if you have a regular corporate account, a regular client, a regular event who's coming to you on a regular basis, and you're able to push out the reservation, push out the booking to a later date, then that could help you retain that client and that piece of business in the longer term outside of this situation. At the same time, if you don't do that, there's the potential of them shopping around and looking somewhere else. So there's something that needs to be paid attention to around guest loyalty and the value of that guest. At the same time, there's a lot of hotel partners who we're working with on distribution at the moment that have a policy that's now going out into the marketplace around, if your airline route is cancelled to get into our location, then we will be more flexible with you around the terms of the cancellation, the release of the booking, pushing the booking out, etc. However, I think that there's still, based on hotel type, hotel location, market type, and the individual circumstances and the type of business, there's still a case-by-case analysis that has to be done. But definitely, I go back to my first point here, guest loyalty needs to be considered within this equation. And I think that's something that I've noted that the airline industry is doing quite well around, pushing things out if they need to.
Great.
But not always possible in our world of hotels, and I know this the hard way.
Yeah. Anant, you're in the middle of it right now. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I would like to add on, especially to customers, mainly the B2B customers, but I think this could be valid for all customer approach. We should actually act so we don't create panic for customers. So we should actually show them that we know what this coronavirus is about, how it works, and tell them that we take precautions, action that when they visit our hotels, they are not in a risk to actually get infected. Of course, you can't protect yourself anywhere when you are. It's difficult when you are out and maybe you meet people, but we should at least communicate that we have taken a lot of precautions in our hotel, so the customer feel confident. And then, yeah.
Great. So let's talk about possible new markets that we haven't considered before. Staycations. You talk about people being afraid to fly. Maybe they're still willing to drive. How are you looking at that with your portfolio? And how are you switching some of your marketing and sales efforts to attract that customer?
We are looking into the digital marketing and see if we could attract with different kind of digital campaigns to our property. So we actually increasing our activities to drive digital direct bookings. But we also look into different partnerships and partners we have and see what possibilities do we have. But so as I told you, we believe that people have a certain amount of money that would have planned to do something nice and travel. So staycation is definitely a big potential here.
Yeah. I will just speak on behalf of my previous experience with an economy brand here during downturns in particular markets and so on. We really look at the segment very closely and other segments within the market itself. So with Red Roof Inn, for example, there are certain markets where we really had to switch gears, and we converted some of our rooms into more of an extended stay package, and we went heavily after the extended stay market. There's advantages and disadvantages to that, but we found that we were able to shift gears and refocus our efforts on what was in market already there. So something to consider for sure. Mark, did you want to? You look like you were going to add something.
Oh no, you covered what I was going to say. So.
Okay, great. So let's talk about revenue management and all the information that they have, and your market research folks. How can they assist you, Anant? How can they assist leadership in guiding us and giving us information that's crucial during this time period?
Well, I think because there's a lot of feelings going on as you started your presentation, there's a lot of news coming up, and where you can wake up, you can feel really scared. So I think especially the revenue systems and revenue management can actually feed us with facts, so you can actually act on facts based on what's the situation, and then you can, according to the facts, you take relevant actions. And I could also comment on actions we can do B2B wise, typical actions and advices. But for example, we do overbook today, but maybe the revenue system could tell us and show us that cancellations rate, and we could actually overbook more than we do today, and so on. So please add on, Mark.
Definitely. I was going to mention, so earlier this year, the company I work for, RateGain, launched something called Market Drone. And what Market Drone is very good at doing for our hotel partners is it's looking not just at the hotel individually and what is their rate shopping schedule, what are the prices, what are the changes, but is looking at a market level around what are the key changes, sending out push notifications across all of the different devices that someone uses within the revenue management world. So, you know, my very strong advice to everyone is to look at your current business intelligence tools that you have and speak to the different providers that you have, the different market managers that you have, and just make sure, you know, are you getting the most up-to-date information? If it means that you're working with a rate shopping tool today that sends you a daily report at 8 o'clock in the morning every morning, and that's what your revenue and distribution team use, maybe you need to not be dramatic and change provider and go somewhere else. Obviously, if you want to do that, you know where to come. But at the same time, you know, talk to your current provider and say to them, maybe we need to change the profiles. Maybe having our rate shopping report come at 8 o'clock in the morning isn't relevant during this period of time. Maybe we need the updates more often, more frequently. Maybe during this period, we need to change our competitors, our channels, our segments, our time in advance, our occupancy per room, our length of stay, because all of these key characteristics that we're working on normally change within a time of Corona, SARS, 9/11, volcano. It's not business as usual, it's different. And I think one of the key learnings that I have throughout my 23 years in the industry is we're all very good at setting up our hotels on booking.com when it was first launched, or the GDSs when we opened the doors of our hotel, or our website when we first launched it. But going back and changing things, updating the content around health and safety and what will happen in the event of a lockdown, going back and looking at the rate shopping profiles, going back and looking at the channel management. Do I work with all of the channels that I could be working with in the market that other people are working with? And really take stock, take some time to reevaluate the setup in all of the channels, on all of the products, and just make sure, you know, today is not a normal day. So what would I do if I was opening my hotel today as opposed to having opened it before? And that's something that I think a lot of people tend to neglect in times of crisis. They say, all of our data shows something that's bad. Maybe the competitors that you're looking at today, or the channels you're looking at today, are no longer the same as they were before. So
yeah,
a bit of advice there.
My clients I advise right now too is look at the broader concept, because if you're only looking at 5 hotels on a rate shopping tool and you have one bad player or 2 bad players in there, it can really change your perspective. But if you look at a broader concept, you might think differently about what's actually happening in the market. And it's good too, you know, going back to that rate discussion, focusing in, and this will be kind of my next question as well, focus in on your customer ratings, your quality ratings, and so on. And if you're discounting at the level of a lesser competitor, are you sending a message to the customers by saying, hey, maybe there's something wrong with my hotel by pricing at their level? Any thoughts on that, Anant?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Sorry.
Okay, so
take it again.
Regarding quality ratings and price,
yeah,
you know, if we drop pricing and yet we have a good quality rating, are we sending a wrong message to the customer out there by having such a low rate?
Definitely, there's also the question of price positioning, and I agree with you that that if you have this type of value on the TripAdvisor ratings you get, that this is the value of the hotel, that should be reflected on the pricings you have as well.
Mark, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a bit of an add-on to that scenario as well that Anant is talking about. So there's the same, we've seen certain cases where hoteliers have said, okay, so we're going to, because we've got less occupancy coming in, we're now going to adapt the service that we're offering. And, you know, when we're looking at business intelligence data around hotels who have advised us of changing their service, we normally find that there's a negative knock-on impact of that. So someone has picked my hotel because they like my hotel. They like the bar, they like the restaurant, they like the turn down service, they like the instant check-in with an iPad at the reception desk. If you then, during a time of crisis, go ahead and say, well, there's less people arriving, so we're going to not do daily maid service anymore, or we're going to close the bar permanently, or we're going to change the service in one way or the other, there's normally a negative impact of that. So trying to retain the brand identity, I think, is very key, because the data that we look at says when you start to adapt the brand identity and the service that's offered, ultimately the business pickup is longer to come back, and it doesn't stimulate occupancy, it actually detracts from the occupancy.
It's also because we are not hotel industry, not all of them. Hotels are high profitable hotels. It's quite, the margins are very low. So there's always this balance to those. You mentioned yourself, Mark, that there's a drop of 30%, 38% on your customer base, and 27% in, I think it was Europe or overall. So, and looking to Edward Lyon's question, which I was thinking of, I don't know the figures, how much layoff they did from 9/11, but I'm quite sure that this will have an effect, as Emirates asked them to take 1 month's unpaid leave. I'm quite sure that this will have effect on the hotel, and it might have the situation that some hotels will hit to have limited services during some time. So it's always a balance. You need to survive as well. So you can't just run a hotel on a negative profit.
No.
So let's hope that this doesn't keep on for too long. So
yes, for sure.
Yep.
Okay.
And the other question we had also was from LinkedIn. What are some of the strategies used to target the driver market? So in my way, it's the same strategies as you normally use. And my advice is also to be, some people, when during crisis you would like to actually save on. The easiest is save on is actually save. My advice is not to save on save. You should continue pushing and actively be on the markets you believe that this is my driver market. As you have said, Mark, you could also consider different strategies. Haven't you been on OTA? Maybe think about that. But definitely, even if the customer is not booking now, you should work with them, keep a relationship, because when it turns, they will come to you who has kept a relationship with them. So you should definitely identify your driver markets and have the same strategy you have today.
Great. So we're just about out of time here, and I just wanted to let the two of you just kind of give any final words, any advice that you have for the audience here today.
Yes.
Mark, and
Mark.
We'll start with you.
Is it Mark? I would like to just give some advice on meeting events, because there is, even if I said that there are a lot of cancellations, we can see there is a demand out there. People will need to meet, and I think the demand will be mainly domestic, but also an advice to have a control on who is actually on the books, and maybe you can spend some more time to have a dialogue with those groups you have on the books and see how does this look like. Because if you could avoid cancellation by just having a dialogue and giving them confidence that we have things under control here, that will save you a lot of money to attract new customers. And if there is indication that there's a client going to rebook or cancel, better to do it as early as possible so you can actually take precautions and action to mitigate that. So they don't wait to the last cancellation day to do the cancellations. And the last final advice, don't be afraid to overbook. We will have more cancellations than normally. So just overbook. We will definitely see the situation. And it feels uncomfortable. That's overbook.
It's good advice, Anant. Mark, what's your final words?
So, strong advice here as well around a few things. Obviously, not to panic, but outside of not panicking, which is common sense, take some time to go back to the basics around what does my content look like on all of the relevant channels that I distribute on? Is it up to date on what people are concerned about today? Have a look at my channel strategy and my distribution mix. Have I held back on certain channels because formerly I didn't need them? And then have a look at what's happening within your local market. If there are airline routes that are cancelled, make sure that you're not targeting them on media. Make sure you're not running active sales campaigns against markets that can't easily get to you. And focus heavier on the domestic market at the moment, because that seems to be the more buoyant of the mix.
Great, thank you. And then just my advice, like yours, don't panic right now. This is a time for us to really be strong leaders, pay close attention to the external information, and find new information, not just what you traditionally look at, but make sure you're looking at every angle of it. Be very transparent with the stakeholders and with your owners. And then finally, maintain really strong relations with all your partners, whether it be an OTA partner, whether it be your clients. Make sure that you're walking with them through this difficult time as well, and have really strong relations so that when things start turning around, they think of you first, and they come back in strong numbers again. So I want to thank everybody for your time here today. And likewise, if anybody has any additional questions, you can post them on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to answer any questions after the fact as well. So with that, we'll close the session, and thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.